The Opinion Line on Cork's 96 FM.
Eoghan Corry is the editor of Air and Travel magazine. Eoghan, good morning to you.
Good morning, PJ.
So, anybody who wants to go on a foreign holiday this summer should be able to do so by the end of July, as long as it's to an EU country and they're fully vaccinated. Does that sum it up?
Pretty much, and it's not that complicated, really. What will happen is from June, around June the 7th, Spain will open, but July the 1st is the date Europe will hold to. International travel will open up, the Green Cert will be implemented, and the only clear thing about the Green Cert is that fully vaccinated passengers, travellers, will be able to travel internationally without restriction, but what will happen in Ireland is that we'll sit back, wait and see, have a look, is it working, and we'll roll in 4 to 6 weeks later. So when you see different dates in different publications that you've just read out, it's people calculating from July the 1st how long it will take Ireland to follow suit. But there is another major issue, PJ, that the vaccination is obviously being given to the older people first. Listeners will have seen those funny memes about grannies dancing on tables in Ibiza because they're the only ones that are allowed to travel. But what happens for the 30-somethings, the 20-somethings, and more importantly, the teenagers over the age of 6? It's quite likely that we will have a complicated situation where countries have different regulations, and that a lot of them will still require a PCR test for people, including your teenagers, travelling on a family holiday. That's not so much the $6,000 question, it's the $89.99 question, because that's how much it costs to get your PCR test from Randox at the airport.
Yeah, you see, there's the thing. Even if, for example, mom and dad will be vaccinated, then the teenagers won't be at this point in time. So whatever rules are being placed for them, we don't know until you go there, essentially, or try to book.
Well, the other thing the European Union is trying to do is to get rid of a situation where everybody has different rules. Some countries it's 48 hours test, some it's 72, some of them say it's over 18, some say it's over 16. In our case, it's over 6, and that's what the Spaniards, who are our big, let's face it, Spain and Portugal are the big holiday destinations, that's what they're thinking of, that under 6 won't need a negative test or a vaccination. The question about vaccinating, and only 23% of Europe has got their first jab and 11% has got their second jab. Those figures are rapidly rising right across Europe. But we then run into the ethical question of giving vaccinations to younger people while Africa is still waiting for vaccinations. I don't think that we would see a situation where teenagers would be vaccinated, and that raises the question, do people take this thing of maybe mom and dad are vaccinated, but we're certainly going to be testing the people in their late teens and possibly throughout their teens.
And will it be PCR, or is there an appetite for antigen?
There's a huge appetite for antigen. The antigen debate in Ireland is particularly negative towards antigen, but in Germany it's particularly pro-antigen. But again, we have 27 countries with different regulations. We also have different vaccines in different countries. Hungary would have a very high percentage of people with the Sputnik vaccination. And so some countries have used the Chinese, which haven't been cleared by the ECDC. Sputnik would be quite prevalent in Turkey, who is outside the European Union, but hoping to be included in these measures. So we could have a situation where it's sort of a la carte. We've an awful lot in the last year.
Could it be, Eoghan, I'm sensing a question here, could it be that some places, and I know the EU may want to operate a blanket set of rules, but, not everybody will follow those to the letter. So could it be a case that you'd have to have one of the EU-approved vaccines?
Very likely, and you've put your finger on it there. What happened last March is we 27 different countries running around in a panic, implementing their own measures. As soon as the Italian rates began to rise, everybody panicked. And while the European Union has been trying to put this notion that we are one community. We're 27 different, shared economies within one community. That all fell apart last year, and quite spectacularly in October, when the European Commission came up with the traffic light system, and the Council of States then, the document that went into the room bore no resemblance to the one that came out, because each of the 27 was going their own way. What the European Union have been sounding out in recent weeks is that they don't want to see that happen again. They want on July the 1st to have the green certificate in place, and they want states to implement it within 6 weeks, and not just pick out the bits that they like. And that is where this whole scheme will either fail or thrive. And the technology is awesome, by the way, PJ. The technology is very straightforward. You get your certificate, you upload it, the QR code is then checked with the relevant health authority. And as you go through the gate, you scan your boarding pass. Listeners will be very familiar with that. It just goes ding. Then you press, you tick your little Ryanair boarding pass. The COVID documentation pops up, and you scan that QR code too. The whole thing which we all worried about managing sets of documents is travel used to be very stressful with managing an awful lot of sets of documents with passports and things like that. But now the technology has been quite spectacular.
If I open my iPhone here and I open the wallet in it, for example, Eoghan, I mean, if I book a flight now, I need do no more, because it'll just come into my iPhone and my boarding pass will be there and a QR code to scan through as a boarding pass. Will my vaccine information be amalgamated into that?
Funny you should say that, because while it hasn't amalgamated it yet, but it could actually happen. Ryanair have amalgamated it. You you check in with Ryanair. It asks you to upload your COVID documentation, which at the moment will be your PCR test to get back into Ireland or to travel to the country, like Spain or Portugal will require it. So you have your emails, usually PCR test result, and you upload that, and that comes in at the top of your boarding pass. There's a little separate button, COVID documentation, or it says COVID documentation not loaded, which is a red alert to the check-in staff and to the people at the gate. But when your COVID is loaded, you do is just tap that, and up pops the QR code for the COVID. I travelled out for the big announcement by Pedro Sanchez that Spain is reopening in Madrid last week, and that's my experience of travelling is it sounds a lot more complicated than it turned out to be.
Right. Okay. Because it was getting really easy. Just all you needed was your phone. Question from a listener on what's the situation with the UK? Will we need vaccinations to go there?
At the moment, the vaccination doesn't exist as far as the Irish government is concerned, and the advice is that all but essential travel is banned. Now, what the Irish government will have to, in the first part of their timetable, is lift that ban on travel. Asymmetrical is the phrase that I heard a few Tory MPs throw around the House of Commons, because we don't need to self-isolate when we go to the UK, but we do on return, and you do need your PCR test on return. You can book it over in Britain, but be very careful. The NHS test is not recognised by the Irish immigration authorities. In one case, we had 30 people. We had 30 people carted off a flight from London for mandatory hotel quarantine, not because they weren't tested, but because the NHS test is not recognised.
The NHS test not recognised? That's weird.
Well, it hasn't been recognised by a couple of other European countries as well. But that actually brings into focus the chaos.
Is that a Brexit thing
around travel? No, not at all. No, it's under our COVID regulations that if you don't have a test that's recognised by the Irish immigration, you have to do your mandatory hotel quarantine.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering why the NHS wouldn't be recognised. That's bizarre in the extreme. Talk to me a bit first about the state of the industry. We know the pilots protested yesterday. The IALPA union protested outside Leinster House. Like the industry, to be fair, is in rag order, isn't it, Eoghan?
Pretty much, but it's recovered to about 36% of its 2019 levels across Europe. It's down about 65%. What we've done is we've dug a trench that's a bit deeper. So our international connectivity is down about 85%. The European, the air traffic control system, Eurocontrol, they list the 40 countries each week and they relate the figures to 2019, and we are the most disconnected of those 40 countries, which is bizarre when you think we're an island. So we've done a lot of, COVID has done its fair amount of damage. We've done a lot more damage ourselves, and that response of Aer Lingus and Ryanair would be to look at other countries that they can move their aircraft. Ryanair's traffic went up 25% last week, for instance, because Portugal to UK routes opened up. So they're looking at placing aircraft elsewhere. Some of them, they've announced new routes from Belfast. But I don't think, despite all the rhetoric, and you'll hear Michael O'Leary talking about uselessness and dithering politicians and all the usual phrases he uses, if we get the summer back up and running, it doesn't have to be exactly July the 1st with the rest of Europe, but 6 weeks later, end of July into August, the airlines will hold their shape. They already have the schedules in the system for this year, and you've got a good choice. You've got good frequencies. You've got good routes. You've 4 new routes from Dublin even, and all of that's in shape from the aviation industry, waiting for the government to raise the flag and let the runners off.
There is a sort of a narrative being pushed out there that if we don't get back to Spain for our holidays this summer, we'll never get back there again from Ireland. That's not going to happen.
It's not a case of it, that in May of 2021 it's that dramatic, but there certainly are things that we need continuity on. We certainly need continuity on things like Cork Airport. We need to know that it's a viable operation that can be kept open and kept serviced. And if we lose summers after, a second summer, all of those big questions come into play. But the reality is that as you say, the world is going to come to an end unless travel opens this summer. Bits of it will get a bit frayed, but the aviation industry has decided is to give us all the options and leave it ready for the off. Big decisions could be made, though, by Aer Lingus, for instance. When we entered this crisis, PJ, IAG had an Irish CEO, Willie Walsh, and an Irish, a Cork-born CEO of Aer Lingus, Sean Doyle. So now we have an English-born CEO of Aer Lingus and a Spanish CEO of IAG. The same loyalties aren't going to be there. Aer Lingus has big decisions to make, and proportionally their losses were colossal.
Well, lastly and briefly on, because obviously it's a big local focus here, and I know that keeping your eye across the industry, you may have a take on it. We now know that the airport here in Cork is closing to have the runways redone for 7 to 10 weeks in the autumn. Is there concern across the industry about that closure?
7 to 10 weeks won't make a big difference. The real issue for Cork is that it might be the only 7 to 10 weeks that they get any traffic if traffic is reopening. What they did was they moved things forward. The scheduled runway refurb, listeners will be very familiar with the argument here that they just moved it forward because traffic was down and it was a good time to move. The problem with everything in the public sector is that the procurement, there's European money, all of that, it's slow to get it going. It would have been lovely to have it done February, March when there was no flights, and that's what Ryanair were screaming and shouting about. But what Ryanair would do is just go in, build a runway in a weekend, and then be in court with the regulators for 4 years to come. Cork Airport doesn't have that option. It's spending public money, so it travels at the pace it does. Yeah. It probably makes sense. We won't be running at high levels of capacity no matter what happens in 2021, so it probably makes sense to brought that runway forward.
Quick question has come in from Kevin, regular listener, needs to go to London. It's urgent, it's an emergency trip. When he's coming back, where does he procure a test?
There are a couple there's quite a few online agencies that do it within London. As I say, don't do an NHS. Make sure it's a PCR test. And I know that a colleague that is in London for an NUJ meeting has just done his this morning in Knightsbridge. So there are the PCR tests facilities in a lot of places, including the airports. But a very important part of this is that a PCR test result often takes longer, so make sure you do it the day before and get it. It can be quite efficient when it works. You get the email on the morning of your flight, but there's no way you can actually appear in an airport without a PCR test and then suddenly start looking for it.
So could he walk into somewhere like a Boots, for example, and ask?
Boots are doing antigen tests. Antigen won't do it. It has to be PCR.
Right.
And there are clinics that are doing it.
Okay. All right. Okay, Eoghan, thanks very much. Eoghan Corry, editor of Air and Travel magazine.
Cork's 96 FM.